Welcome to the Myth and Magic Authors Podcast, folklore and fantasy topics aimed at creative storytellers. To write stories and challenge your brain with exciting ideas, delve into these presentations and reflections. See how fantasy realms are based on actual world history, legend, and lore. Study fairy tales, nature fables, and supernaturalism to engage in a jumble of concepts that will trigger your fancy and get you writing imaginatively. Now, here's your host, Neil Mack.
Hello, Myth and Magic fans. So in this special edition of Myth and Magic, we chat to Wisconsin-based Jean Lee, L-E-E, who's the author of the Fallen Princeborn series of young adult novels. Now, Jean is a very busy mother, so how does she find time to write her novels? And what can she tell us about portals? Because I came across her when I read an excellent article on her author page about boundaries and doors, and about how these portals into other realms often involve slipping under a chain or a rope, or going off of a main path, or across a field and into mysterious and often dangerous terrain that I thought, as I was reading the article, was like a literal and also a metaphorical journey that we all make, us writers, especially fantasy fiction writers. I believe that artists have the will and probably the desire to cross into forbidden territory more than ordinary folk. So I wanted to talk to Jean about that. And also wanted to talk to Jean about the limits and the forbidden doors. So first of all, I wanted to say hello to Jean. Hi, Jean. How is it there?
We're in a pretty small farming town, but like just outside it, just the open skies, the open space. You cannot get that everywhere. I mean, for a while I lived in the big city of Wisconsin, which is Milwaukee, and that's 500,000. That's big for us. And you could never see the sky really. There was too much light pollution. So moving out into the country, I love being able to see constellations. I love being able to actually see the sky.
Would you like to tell the readers where you're at? Explain about Wisconsin? And would you explain where it is geographically?
Well, so we've got, as far as the United States goes, I'm in the Midwest. Wisconsin is tucked up right into the Great Lakes. We're that hand-shaped state that's between the Mississippi River, and then there's Lake Michigan here. And I'm kind of like, if this is Wisconsin, and like up here is Green Bay, way up here is the up north woods, and getting closer to Canada's up here. I'm kind of like down there. We're kind of in the middle. Like we're an hour and a half away from Lake Michigan. We're an hour and a half away from the Mississippi River. We're just kind of stuck in the southern area where it's a lot of farms, a lot of suburbs, and not too far from the capital, which is Madison. And yeah, just a lot of cornfields, a degree of the Amish community who do not live with electricity at all. So there are some horse buggies out and about. And yeah, and just learning how to share your car on the tiny roads when the tractors are out too. So I love being here, and it's unique too in that a lot of our farms are bordered by forests. There's a lot of just these patches of wilderness out here. So it's not uncommon to see a farm just completely bordered by trees, or there will be trees actually dividing farms. And it's cool. I remember talking to someone who lived out, it was my publisher, because she lives in California, and she could not wrap her head around trees in farmland. Like she's like, farms don't have trees on them. It's like, there are trees all over the place on our farms. There will be the lone elm in the middle of cornfield. they'll do that because, you know, it helps with soil erosion. So I love on how, you know, even though in this state where I am, there's a lot of, you know, man-tamed landscape, you know, with the farm field and the communities. There are still these patches of wilderness that are just too stubborn to go, or this nestle of trees, or there's a little wild place that has like a forgotten driveway that might have a rope over it or just a log. I know I talked about this in my post you read, where it'll say no trespassing. And it's like, but where does that go? And it's not paved. Where does that go? And it just goes up into the trees somewhere. You don't know what's up there. And there's so many places like that around here. I love it. I love the mystery. And I mean, Wisconsin's also got its own kind of unique history with, I know this kind of ties into the idea of portals, but of portals to horror in our town. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the film Psycho. or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Those were based, those concepts, those characters were based on the man Ed Gein, Wisconsin's own, who in a very small town, Plainfield, Wisconsin it's a tiny town of a few hundred people, maybe 1,000, where he dug up graves and made furniture out of human skin and just tucked away in our small town, this little farmhouse on the edge of town, and he's doing all this, and that's something that, you know, has stuck with people. It stuck with me when I realized who he was, because it's just a normal looking door can lead into anything, whether it's a room full of, you know, drawstring shades made out of human lips, or just a typical, you never know around here. So I like Wisconsin's mystery. But no, I've pretty much been in Wisconsin all my life. I've done some degree of like traveling. I actually spent the summer studying in Ireland at the university in Cork. But that was as much like out of country traveling I've been able to do. I've never even been able to get to Canada.
So are you coping with all that life throws at you? I know you're a busy mother. So how do you plan out your day, and how do you find time to write?
I really got back into writing when my children were born. Like, I studied writing in school, and I got so turned off to writing by all the, no, you have to do this if you want to be marketable. No, you shouldn't write genre. That's just idiot. And just, you know, all these pressures on what is good writing, what isn't good writing. And I just got burned out, and I just didn't want to do it anymore. And it took the birth of my firstborn and the onset of postpartum depression to really start wanting to explore. Use writing as a way to just get out of my space for a bit and just have that break psychologically, emotionally, parenting, because parenting is tough, and it's especially tough when you are around one another 24/7, which was the case. And so I got into writing a little bit with her when she was born, and then when my twins were born a couple of years later, then it became like writing was my source of sanity, because I needed to work through my emotions. Because the thing about postpartum depression, especially when it's not treated, I mean, it is a dark place to go. It is a very dark place to go. And the horror is that the darkness sounds normal. I remember my very first blog post when I started my blog back in 2015, gosh. I likened postpartum depression to Jason Voorhees from the Friday the 13th movies. Yes. Just always there, you know. And I needed writing as a way to create characters who just were just as screwed up as I felt, and were just as I'm struggling just as much. But I can't, I don't have magic I can physically create, but just putting them through into situations and conflicts that I could then work out through those dark feelings and and find myself better for it. And so as the kids have gotten older, sure, they're a little more self-reliant. I don't have to try and chase after them with diapers anymore because they are 10 and 8 now. But there's still, because of this pandemic, there's still a lot of virtual learning at home. And so they still need me, but I still need to write. So I try to set aside a little bit of time every day just to, whether it's just thinking about a story or doing a little bit of editing or planning or working out some dialogue in a scene, just a little bit every day. And I have to set aside those minutes every day. Otherwise, they just get quickly swallowed in motherhood or teaching.
So, Jean, tell us about your new spaghetti western bounty hunter style fantasy with all of its magical elements. It sounds terribly exciting.
It was so much fun to write. And the goofy thing was, it wasn't really like what I've been doing before, because my first novel was more young adult fantasy that had the romances you gotta do. But then I was thinking of other characters to do, because at the time my publisher wanted me to do these short stories, which we called Tales of the Riverbank. And so originally my short stories were like a free thing. I've had to since pull, I'll get into that why. But I was going through all these different time periods from, it was the 1840s on into current day and jumping around. And some of it was in the West because, Wisconsin was the frontier for a number of years. They entered statehood in the 1840s, but it was still not really settled for quite some time. So you could have this feeling of the West, even though it wasn't, what people picture, because I always picture the spaghetti westerns too. I love, those are my favorite. I can't, my husband doesn't understand it. I cannot watch John Wayne westerns. But like the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns, sit and watch those. But the thing is, it's like, because so many of those are set like very desert, barren landscapes, and Wisconsin doesn't exactly have deserts. It doesn't exactly have a ton of these barren areas, but there's still that raw landscape. There's still, I love Wisconsin's landscape can change quite a bit. It has a lot of level areas. That's why the farms, but there's still, again, like the wilderness. And as you get closer to the Mississippi River, it gets very hilly. It's like bluffs. And they still, like, to travel along those bluffs on these narrow roads, just, I would have a panic attack having to drive those for school. And just thinking how they had to cut train track through these very tenuous areas, and looking into the history of trying to, civilize, trying to get my air quotes into the screen here, civilize, bringing the white man's idea of civilization into Wisconsin meant the railway. And it was, but still there wasn't a whole lot of like law established. And there was still just the idea of trying to create settlements was still tough until closer to, I'd say it was like after the Civil War, things finally would simmer down, but it still was pretty unstable. And so it was a lot of fun doing research into Wisconsin's history and into, what was happening at that time. I know in the Knight's Tooth, the Western one, that was really cool to see, like, just how little law there was still involved in Wisconsin at that point. And just the things that were happening. Like, in one point in Knight's Tooth, I mentioned a bit of Mormon history that was quite true. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mormon Church. They also go by Latter-day Saints. Like, I've been doing a lot of read-up on them. And they, at one point, did indeed go through Wisconsin, create a settlement, refused to pay for the materials, and then burned it all to the ground before just taking off. And when I found that bit of history, it was like, oh. And so it was a lot of fun inserting a magical element into the historical period to kind of twist it and make it even more nefarious. It was, it's so much fun, like you were saying about Highlander, because I grew up an action junkie. I didn't know Westerns as well when I was a kid, but I knew Highlander because my dad was a huge Highlander fan. So watched the TV show, saw the movies, and I always thought it was so cool on how you can be these different lives you live, even though you are one person, but there's all these different lives you've lived through history. And having sword fights, because it's always fun to have a sword fight. Having these epic battles that just stuck with me. And I love this idea of these conflicts that don't just span a story, but can span centuries, depending on who they're portraying. And I love that. And I didn't always apply the Western setup, but I found it to be really fun because there felt like there were less restrictions that you could toy around with in that period. And that's why I'm hoping I can return to that period too with another tale. I'm not sure if I want to stick with my bounty hunter or if I'm going to create a new person to follow. I had a lot of fun writing that bounty hunter though. There's something great about writing an anti-hero, one who has a code. It's just his code. And whether or not it relates to anybody else is the man with no name, like Clint Eastwood. And
your series is called Tales of the River Vine. Is there an actual place called River Vine?
No, I wish it was. That's the cool thing again. Like, I always kind of thought that because Wisconsin has, like I was saying, so many just hidden places, and there's these just what I feel lost and forgotten places. And there will be these old structures, at least old by our standards, I should say.
Yes.
Living where you are, there's structures that have been around for like 1,000+ years. We don't have a lot of that. For us, like, you think lasting 150 years is amazing. Yeah. But when there's discovery of these like forgotten, lost places that are so easily just kind of dismissed, it's like, oh yeah, there's that old wall that's always been there. And it's a thing. And we just kind of think past it because we're so caught up in the present. And for me, it's so much fun to think, well, what could that wall have been built for? What is back there? Why is this here? And there was this wall. It wasn't as high. I wished it was higher. It was in like this nature preserve. It was originally built. It was part of this like summer camp place. So there's a lot of like half-made structures there. But there was this wall, and it just looked so much older than it really was, probably because of the elements, I'm presuming. But I love this idea of like crossing over, kind of like Neil Gaiman's Stardust, that wall that's just, people have just, that wall has always been there. But when you actually cross over the wall, you are actually crossing over into an entirely different place, a different realm with different rules. And I love seeing the thinness of the boundary between the possible and the impossible. Yeah. And how it can be something as seemingly concrete as a wall, or it can be something as simple as a doorway, or it can just be something as simple as a line of trees, and crossing into crossing over that boundary into something not understood, not known, and the possibility of that.
Our job as fantasy fiction writers is to cross boundaries and enter magical worlds. To describe to our readers, I think, the difficult alchemy of creating a universe from our mind. Don't you think this is right?
That's exactly it, and especially because it takes so much trial and error to find the right words to communicate the world that we see with the reader, because the reader is always going to interpret it differently, and that's that's the way that goes. But it's like trying to make sure the world we picture makes sense.
Yes.
Like when I first was coming up with Rivervine and such, my first novel, that took like 8 years to kind of work through. And then my publisher at the time was really pushing me on certain world building rules that I really hadn't thought about. Where it's like, well, but they're not bothering with X right now. I don't have to worry about X. But it's like, oh, I really should think this through, because I think that's one sticking point I know for a lot of fantasy readers. And I will agree with them, because I've now had some reading experiences where where the laws of the magic don't add up. And which just shows like the writer had a really cool idea and ran with it without totally thinking it through. And I realized, I'm like, oh, I don't want to be one of those people that does that. I got to make sure I think through what I'm doing so that readers can keep up. Otherwise, it's like, that would be like in Highlander if suddenly graveyards were okay to fight on just because they wanted to have a really cool fight scene at a graveyard. It's like, you can't do that. No, sacred ground. The rules have to work. It's like you're saying too, like in the time frame, like the rules have to make sense in the time they're doing it. And that was one thing I realized when I was writing the short stories for Rivervine in the different time periods. I had to make sure it's like, okay, if they are able to do this in the 80s, in the 1980s, does that make sense for them to also be doing in the 1890s? Okay, I've got to make sure this actually fits with what's going on, that the laws are consistent. Because if you start messing around with rules that, people remember from a previous story, they're not going to trust you as a writer to be relaying that story or believing in that world. And then it's a lousy experience for everyone.
So the first in the Rivervine series is Knight's Tooth from 2019, and it only has 94 pages. But tell us about that.
It's a novella. Yeah, it was going to be short, and then suddenly it was like, how long did it end up being? Like almost 100 pages. It was going to be a short story, and then it wasn't. Because I had so much fun, like you're saying, with the spaghetti westerns. I love drawing out the moment, oh man, because I had the Ennio Morricone music on, and I've got we got to have the close up of the eyes here. We got to have this shot of the sweat going down the head. And writing all of it out, because when you stretch a moment on paper, suddenly it takes several pages to go through. A moment. But that's the thing with those, because just think about. Personally, I personally find For a Fistful of Dollars, I love that over Good, the Bad, the Ugly. Good, the Bad, the Ugly is wonderful, but I love Fistful of Dollars, and then For a Few Dollars More. I love those. I think because there's more of there's something about the story, but the duo, the showdowns, like that three-way showdown with the watch, the musical watch, and it just, he is gonna pull you off your seat because you're like, what's happening? What's gonna happen? And I loved that effect as a storyteller upon a reader, where you're just pulling that tension as far as it's gonna go. And so that's what I found myself doing writing the Westerns. You can't breeze through the fight scene. You can't breeze through the showdown. You gotta slow it down, because then it's not tense. If you just, and then there's all this fighting. You can't do that. It just, that's what makes, because again, loving my action movies, that's what makes certain action movies timeless compared to other movies, because you have that drawn out tension, as opposed to, we're in another fist fight again. You can't just jump in and out of fist fights. So that's why it ended up being a novella compared to my other short stories, which again, I'm hoping to republish these. Okay. They were originally supposed to be promo short stories about Rivervine, about different characters in Rivervine, before that first novel came out back in 2018. So I was writing these short stories in the different historical time periods and current day. When my publisher decided not to continue with my series, I had all these short stories. I had just finished Knight's Tooth, which is why then I published it myself back in 2019. My hope is to, because right now Knight's Tooth is just an ebook. My hope is to kind of revise and do a little expanding on the short stories I had written and put those together with Knight's Tooth to make a complete collection. And I also then do that in print. And then also I've got a couple other novellas that are Rivervine related in different time periods as well that I'd like to get out in ebook form over the next year or so. Yeah. Because I find, like, as much as I love going to the Western period, it's been so much fun thinking about this magical race and how they can kind of permeate in other time zones as well. And it's been so much fun thinking of like historical areas they could be connected to and like historical events where they could have that presence, you know. There's just so much potential, and it's especially when you can get that action horror element involved too. I love it. Yes.
Do you have any heroines in your tales?
Oh, I do. I have in the novels, they actually center around an 18-year-old girl named Charlotte. And she, because this magical race called Validivore, they live beyond the wall, that's Rivervine. They take her sister. And so Charlotte goes over the wall to get her sister back. And because Rivervine itself is a cursed land that claims whatever passes over, Charlotte offers herself in her sister's place to stay on that land, to take on the curse of the land. And from there, magical hijinks ensue. That, you know, she herself is I would say, a very flawed and fierce character. She is a fighter because she herself suffered from a very abusive childhood and put that abuse basically into her fists to become a total menace wherever she went to school. But that ferocity then also plays to her advantage in fighting back for her sister and then coming to terms with what is she truly fighting for. And so she's been a lot of fun to write because she has to come to terms with her own bloody past, that, you know, the trauma she experienced, but then the trauma she also put out. And the people that she befriends that are also cursed on Rivervine also have their own very horrible past where they did horrible things. And I guess because I could go off on this whole Mary Sue thing in current storytelling. That's its own diatribe. But to me, the path of redemption is something so many of us can relate to because we know we are not perfect. We want to be better, though, and we want to fight to be better. And it's very hard to relate to a character who is already perfect. When you can connect to a character who cocked up quite a bit because you yourself have, you know, cocked it up quite a bit. And so when you see it is possible to be forgiven, that the character it's possible for that character to find forgiveness and move forward into a life of hope and maybe even love, it's that then we feel that is possible of ourselves as well. I've done this not quite as traumatic. I had a fun turn with this. This is something I'm hoping to put out next year, but it's called Middler's Pride, which is more of a epic style fantasy. Okay, so you have another world, sword and sorcery type stuff. And I love this character. Her name's Meredith. And she thinks she's the shit. She thinks it's like, I'm already a warrior. I'm a legend in the making. And so she acts as such around other people. She blames her family for getting in her way. And she's basically a total ass. And she did not go through the in her mind, she had a very traumatic upbringing because she was neglected by her stepmother and her dad in her brain, and has to come to terms with the fact that she kind of cut herself off. And when she goes finally to train to become a shield maiden, she has to learn the hard way. She doesn't know everything, and she can't do it all. And when a river goddess does still come to her for help, she thinks she is just completely inept. She is incapable. There's no way she could actually solve the river goddess's problem. And that's when she starts to truly become a legend. And to me, again, it's just like you have to have these characters who are flawed. They have, whether it's they are totally unlikable because they are such jerks to everyone, or they have gone through that trauma. Either way, it's like when we meet characters who themselves have these weaknesses, are cracked, are broken to some degree, we can relate to them better than characters who are just, we feel sorry for, but are still perfect because everything works out for them perfectly all the time. It just, there's no tension over whether that character can actually do anything. There's no surprise when that kind of character succeeds because they're perfect. Of course they're going to succeed. They always do. And that's such a point of frustration to me as a storyteller. So I like making characters who are either screwed up or have a tendency to screw up, so that when they finally get to do something right or things right, we actually care. It's like, yay!
What tips would you like to give any fantasy fiction author out there who's perhaps beginning their journey on a writing career? Perhaps they're starting out this year on the November NaNoWriMo.
Yeah. Oh, yes, NaNoWriMo. See, that, I love NaNoWriMo. Even if I can't do it every year, I will always have a love of NaNoWriMo because that's what got me started back in writing when my firstborn came. A friend of mine told me about NaNoWriMo, and I was like, and I actually did it despite having a newborn baby and a teaching job. I was able to actually get 50,000 words in a month, and I will never forget that accomplishment. And so I guess to get into fantasy writing, I am not a big fan of outlines, but I respect them. And especially if you're thinking of something that's really big scale, and it's truly epic, you have to have some sort of plan because otherwise you end up digging yourself so many plot holes that you're going to fall into. And that's no fun for anybody. You as a writer or the readers if you miss those holes. I guess also though, embrace the pantsing of it, the idea of just being able to write freely, because you may discover events or characters or character traits you could not plan beforehand. They just come. It's organic, and embrace that organic moment, because if it surprises you as a writer, you bet your boots it's going to surprise a reader, and that makes the story a joyful experience for both of you. The novel I've got coming out this month, which is finally a sequel to the Fallen Princeborn Chosen, young adult. We're going back to the young adult thing. That was a lot of, where do these characters need to go? And I was following them. Where it hit me, it's like, I can't just rush them from point A to Z. We have to go through all the letters of the alphabet first to get there. And following them through, and especially with my antagonists, I needed to follow what my antagonists were going to do. Because, it's very easy to just have them twirl their mustaches and go, wahaha, but that's no fun for the reader, and it's so boring as a writer when that's all your villain is. It's like, world domination!
Yeah.
Can it please be more than that, please? Can we just have a villain who, that's not all of it. That's not the only point on their agenda. And when I embraced following my villains around, things became so much more interesting. Don't just stick with your heroes. Pay attention to what your villains actually give a toss about. Because if you ignore them, then they're cardboard and the story is going to just suddenly be lopsided.
How can readers get hold of your next and your newest title?
I'm hoping that my plan is that it will be published on Amazon towards the end of this month. So just a few days before Halloween. Good. It should be out as an ebook, as well as paperback. Fingers crossed, I figured that all out. And it should be just there. I will have information on my own website, which is jeanleesworld.com. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram, and I occasionally show up on Facebook going, hey, what's over here? And I'll have that information there too. But yeah, it's primarily going to be on Amazon because I don't know all the Smashword stuff yet. So it'll be there for now. And yes, in print as well as online.
Well, good luck with your new release, Jean. And thanks for talking to me here at Myth and Magic.